Just what the fuck did they do to the voice acting? Now, usually when someone makes a clear opinion about something, people like to edit in some shit like alarm bells or something like a warning not to get triggered by whatever it is they're about to say. No, fuck that. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I heavily prefer the first Xenoblade Chronicles over the second game. If you love the second game, there's obviously nothing wrong with that. We just clearly see shit differently, and there's no reason to be triggered about that. However, I did want to talk about Xenoblade a little more in depth on this channel, so I thought why not just take that opportunity to speak my mind about the two mainline games. Both games were really good games, but for the sake of getting to the point, I think the first game is one of the best JRPGs of all time, while I think the second game is good, but just doesn't live up to the first game in a couple of ways. First off, the most obvious difference between the two that is immediately noticeable is the big art style change. People in the Xenoblade fanbase argue about this pretty commonly. One side thinks Xenoblade Chronicles 2 looks way too anime and the first one doesn't look like that at all, while the other side thinks that they both look equally anime to the same degree. And I honestly have to say, you're both full of shit. It's really a little bit of both, not entirely one or the other. It is true that the second game is a lot more anime inspired in its art direction than the first game, but it's not exactly like the first game lacked that anime touch entirely. It's clear they both do, but the second game took the slight anime touch the first game did and kind of just ran with it as far as they could. In some cases, I love how Xenoblade Chronicles 2 looks, due to its bright and colorful visuals, but overall, I highly prefer the first game's art style. It felt more unique to it, while I can't help but feel the second game just feels a tad bit generic by comparison. With the more anime inspired style to it, it isn't bad, but when I look at the art of Shulk from the first game compared to the second, I just can't honestly say I like him better in the second game's art style. Then, we have to talk about something that's, well, I think one of the absolute worst things about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And it's what I started this video with. When dramatic scenes are happening, the music, voice acting, and animations can really make you feel the emotions the characters are going through. The first game, in my opinion, masters this, and the second game almost does. See, the music and animations are great in the second game, and in some cases they're even better than the first game was, in some cases. But holy shit is the voice acting fucking terrible in the second game, to the point where it actually ruined some dramatic scenes for me. Now mind you, when you're doing these side heart-to-heart interactions, the voice acting is fine, it's passable, and it does the job. But I'm going to show some scenes so you can get a much better understanding as to why I feel the first game did a much better job in making me get more into the scene and feel the emotions behind the characters. They are very clearly early scenes in the game, but if you're still afraid of seeing spoilers, then I recommend skipping this part of the video.
Fiora! Get out of here! Run! No! I'll kill you!
The screams between the characters are so much different, and you can feel the emotion behind Shulk's scream. You can feel the anger behind him. I just do not feel the same about Rex, which honestly sounds really fucking lame by comparison. If you just look at those two scenes, you can see the difference. Not every scene is this bad though. The second game does have some good scenes in it, but a lot of it is very difficult to take 100% seriously due to the very poor voice acting. Story-wise, both games are generally really good as well. Unlike the voice acting, it isn't such a large gap in quality. However, I also do prefer the story from the first game. Now, let me be clear, I know I sound like a broken record at this point, where I just mentioned something and say that the first game does it better, but I do really feel this way. I'm not going to get too far into the story since I'm not really trying to spoil the game for anyone, and the story in these games are such a large part as to why you want to play them. But I feel as though the first game just had so many twists and turns that made me hope things were going to get better for these characters. until eventually it blew me away with the twists and turns that they, introduced later on down the road. The second game didn't really do any of this until the near end of the game. It's weird, but you look at Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and they had plot twists every once in a while that really made you want to keep playing. But 2, it never really felt that way for me. The only time I ever felt that way was, like I said, the end. Xenoblade 1 felt that way the entire story. Xenoblade 2 felt that way just near the end, which I think is just a problem altogether. I feel like the story should have me hooked for the entire thing, rather than just have me there for most of it. The previous point about the voice acting probably plays a big role in this, but I wasn't as invested in the story of the second game as much as I was in the first game. You're also probably expecting me to talk about the soundtrack of the two games as well and compare them, and this is honestly the only comparison between these two games that I could honestly say the second game completely matches the first one in quality. The first game has the better final boss theme, for instance, but the second game has the beauty that is More Ordained's theme, Roaming the Wastes, so it's a hard one. The most I can really say about this one is that they both have beautiful fucking tracks. I think the first game does a better job in terms of making you into the scene that's going on using the music, but God, I can't say for sure that it has the better music altogether, because if you listen to the soundtrack of the second game, it is fantastic. It's a great fucking soundtrack, and it gets you really pumped and really into the game. So all I can really say is, if you liked some of the music from the first one, chances are you're gonna like the second one, and who knows, maybe even prefer the second one. So yeah, all I can say, I highly recommend you check out the soundtrack if you're not interested in playing the games. Traversing the world is probably the weakest part for both games. It isn't exactly the most exciting thing, but honestly, for myself, I play other games for that sort of thing. Xenoblade games are not... I don't play them for exploration, unless you're talking about X, and that's a whole other game to talk about. The locales are fucking beautiful in both games, though, and a joy to look at, but the action of actually traveling from place to place usually isn't much to talk about. The first game was pretty basic. You go place to place, and other than some minor things you can do to change a few details like speed and all that, it stays pretty basic. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 seemingly tried to spice it up a bit by trying specific actions that blades can learn to get places. In theory, this sounds pretty cool. Your partners can level up and learn skills to help you explore the map, but the way it is implemented is infuriating. See, here's the thing. If you aren't familiar with the blade mechanic from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, it's basically an RNG system where you can get random partners with unique skills and even get side quests that are dependent on those characters. It's actually a really cool system. I sort of love this since it can create some very interesting and more diverse playthroughs. But by having the exploration skills vary from blade to blade, from partner to partner, which in turn is tied to an RNG system, it makes whether or not you can explore that secret area you found completely based on RNG. And that is by far the second worst thing about the entirety of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, second only to the voice acting. Please, for the love of God, do not do this again. I do not mind the Blade RNG system in general, but I do not want my exploration tied to RNG. Nobody wants a sequel to Breath of the Wild where Link can only access Death Mountain by opening up fucking loot boxes earned with rupees or playing a side minigame and hope he gets the Goron Tunic. That's just a terrible idea. Never do this again. Okay, I gotta make this clear, since this video does mostly look like I'm shitting on Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I do not hate the game. I actually really love the game. It was easily one of the best games I've played in 2017, and I still do highly recommend people to play it. I'm excited to play the new DLC coming up as well. I could talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 much farther and more in depth, but I feel like I gave you guys a pretty good idea of how I feel between the two. So, you know what? I'll just end this video here. I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Some of the music in that game I will never forget, and some of the voice acting, when it's not tied to the main character mostly, is pretty good. It's decent. It's passable. But it's just those two things the voice acting and the exploration skill-based system just really got to me, and that's really it. The rest of the game is fantastic. It's a very hardcore RPG. The locales are beautiful. The story is interesting, and yeah, I mean, the story does have some low points, but that's kind of it. It's not a terrible game by any means. It's probably the best JRPG on the Switch, if not Xenoblade Chronicles, and it's probably something I haven't played yet. But I still highly recommend the game. I love this game, and I love every game in the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise. But Xenoblade Chronicles 1 still, to me anyways, me personally, is still the best in the series. And that's just how I feel. I have no doubt in my mind that people who played both games can totally bring up a very strong counter-argument to this entire video. And I welcome that with open arms. So please, comment down below and let me know how you feel about this whole thing. And if you haven't played the games, let me know if you're interested in any way. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Before I go, I just wanted to make it very clear that not only is the first Xenoblade Chronicles my preferred game of the two, it is by far one of my favorite games of all time. And instead of ending this video with, you know, see you in the next one and my usual outro, I'm going to end it with what I think is the most beautiful, if not one of the most beautiful intro sequences in a video game ever.